Let us begin by reading the word problem out loud. The previous record for the deepest underwater dive was 237 meters below sea level. A few years later, that record was shattered to 264 meters below sea level. How many meters below sea level was the previous record lengthened by? Let us begin our strategy for problem solving by analyzing the problem. So the first thing we want to identify when analyzing the word problem is the question that we want to answer. In this case, the question being asked is, how many meters below sea level was a previous record shattered by? So now that we know what it is we want to answer, we actually know what it is our variable is going to represent. So let us go ahead and jump to step 2 and assign a variable. Now we want our variable representation to reflect the question being asked. In this case, the question says, how many meters below sea level was the previous record lengthened by? So we're going to go ahead and assign a variable, and we'll go ahead and use the letter x, and we're going to let x equal the number of meters below sea level that the previous record was lengthened by. Again, it's simply the question that's being asked reworded in the form of a statement. So there we go. So it's going to be our assigning of the variable. Let us now go back to analyzing the word problem and see what other information we can extract. So what else do we know? Well, for starters, we know the previous record for the deepest underwater dive was 237 meters below sea level. And we also know that a few years later, that record was shattered to 264 meters below sea level. So let me go ahead and draw a picture of what's actually happening here. So we're working with sea levels, so I'm going to go ahead and draw some waves to represent sea level. And then we also know that the previous record for the deepest underwater dive was 237 meters below sea level. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a diver. And this diver is 237 meters below sea level. So that quantity is 237 meters below sea level. Now the important thing is that since he is below sea level, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to include a negative sign. So that's negative 237 meters below sea level. Now let's talk about the new record. So the new record is now 264 meters below sea level. So here's 264, so he's slightly deeper. And now this distance is 264 meters below sea level. But again, since it is below sea level, we want to go ahead and include a negative sign to represent the fact that he's negative 264 below sea level, below being the keyword here. And now what we want to know is how many meters below sea level was the previous record lengthened by? So ideally, what we have is here's a blue record, which is negative 237 meters. And now here's the new record, which is negative 264 meters below sea level. And now what we want to know is the difference between the two. So we want to know this value right here. That's what we want to know, the number of meters below sea level that the previous record was lengthened by. But the problem is we actually don't know that value. So we're going to go in and substitute in an x for that. And now I believe we have all the information we need to create an equation. So let us go ahead and start our equation. So what do we know? Well, we know the new record is negative 264 meters. So that's the new record, negative 264 meters, or another way to say that is 264 meters below sea level. below is represented by the negative sign. So that's our new record. And that's equal to, well, the previous record, which was 237 meters below sea level, which is again represented using a negative sign for the term below. And now what happened is we had to go further down below sea level, so we want to subtract it to make it a little bit more negative. And that quantity that we went down is going to be our variable x. So that's going to be our equation. So now let us go ahead and solve our equation. Again, when solving, you want to start off with the original equation found in step 3. So we're going to start off with negative 264 equals negative 237 minus x. So now the goal is we want to get the x completely by itself. Right now we're subtracting negative 237 from it, so we're going to want to undo that. So here we go. So currently we have this in the way, negative 237. So the opposite of negativity is positivity. So in order to eliminate that, we're going to want to go ahead and add a positive 237 to both sides. So let's go ahead and do so. Negative 264. So for now, start off with the original equation again. And again, since we want to eliminate the negative 237, we're going to do that by adding the opposite sign, 237, but not just to one side, but to both sides. And again, we have to do it to both sides in order to maintain our equality. So here we go. So what ends up happening is on the right hand side, the negative 237 and the positive 237 cancel each other out, and we're left with a negative x. So now all we have to do on the left hand side is simplify the negative 264 plus 237. And now since these two numbers are opposite sign, the 264 being negative and the 237 being positive, we're going to have to go ahead and use the subtraction rule. Now remember the subtraction rule. The subtraction rule, we do the bigger number in terms of absolute value on top minus a smaller number in terms of absolute value on the bottom, and we subtract the two. So in this case, the absolute value of negative 264 is a positive 264, and the absolute value of a 237 is simply 237. So the bigger of the two is going to be a 264, and the smaller is going to be the 237. So we're going to go ahead and subtract these two. So we'll do 4 minus 7. We can't do that, so we have to borrow from the 6 next door, which now becomes a 5. And then therefore our 4 becomes a 14. So now we're going to have to do 14 minus 7. That's going to leave us with a 7. Doing the 5 minus 3 gives us a 2. And a 2 minus the 2 gives us a 0, so we're left with just 27. However, since the 264 was further away from 0, and it had a negative sign, that means we're going to end up with a negative 27. So the negative 264 plus 237 is equal to negative 27. Now again, we want to get the x completely by itself. The problem right now is that there's a negative sign in front of it. So ideally, there's two ways to eliminate that negative sign. One option is to multiply both sides by -1. The other option is to divide both sides by -1. Either way is going to do it. For this problem, we'll just go ahead and divide both sides by -1. So dividing both sides by let's see what we end up with. On the left-hand side, we'll have a negative 27 divided by a negative 1, which is going to be equal to simply positive 27. And on the right-hand side, the negative x divided by a negative 1, well, those two negative signs are going to simplify out to become a positive sign. So we're going to end up with a positive x, which I'll color code in green. So there we go. That's solving the equation. Now let us go ahead and see our conclusion clearly. So the question was, how many meters below sea level was the previous record lengthened by? And therefore, we're going to go ahead and state the previous record was lengthened by 27 meters below sea level. Again, simply the question reworded in the form of a statement. So now let us go ahead and check our result. So starting off with the original equation found in step 3, we're going to have negative 264, and that's going to be equal to negative 237 minus x. However, we now know the numerical value of x, so we're going to go ahead and substitute that in. Everything else will remain exactly the same for now. So we have negative 264 is equal to negative 237 minus x, which is 27. So now on the left hand side, there's nothing left to do, so we're going to go ahead and bring that down. So I have negative 264 on the left. And on the right hand side, we're going to have to combine these two. So what we can actually do is we can rewrite the negative 27 as addition of a negative number. So again, we're going to go ahead and rewrite that. So negative 237 plus a negative 27. So now what we have to do is we have to combine the negative 237 plus the negative 27. Since it's written as addition and they're both the same sign, we can go ahead and combine them both together. So we're going to have negative 237 plus a negative 27. So again, they're both negative, so we're going to get more negative, and we're going to go ahead and add them up. So we'll have 7 plus 7 is going to give us a 14. So we'll bring down the 4, carry up the 1. Then we'll have 1 plus 3 plus 2, which is going to give us a 6. And then all we have left is to bring in the 2, so we end up with negative 264. So now we know that negative 237 plus a negative 27 is equal to negative 264. And on the left hand side we have negative 264 as well. So we have the left side is indeed equal to the right side, so that verifies that our solution is correct.